Our story's hero was driven by a single, all-consuming ambition to attain the absolute pinnacle of martial arts. However, as time passed, he came to the bitter realization that a lifetime of training would never be enough to achieve his dream. It seemed he was simply not fated to reach the summit of martial mastery. Nevertheless, fueled by sheer desperation, he refused to surrender. He chose to pursue an ancient legend, a tale from a bygone era about a divine dragon that guarded a golden fruit said to bestow immortality upon whoever consumed it. After a savage and deadly confrontation with the divine dragon guardian, he at last arrived at the sacred place where the fabled fruit was supposed to be. He could scarcely believe his eyes. The legendary golden fruit was real. Its brilliant golden luminescence illuminated the area, exuding a profound and mysterious divine aura. Exhausted from the grueling fight, he rested atop the carcass of the slain divine dragon, his gaze transfixed on the glowing fruit. After regaining his breath, he slowly rose and approached the tree. Confidence surged through him. With this fruit, he was convinced he could finally reach the peak of martial arts he had pursued his entire life. Without a moment's hesitation, he plucked the golden fruit and began to eat it. The instant he swallowed, a bizarre and overwhelming energy flooded his body. His veins pulsed, his blood seemed to boil, and his entire frame trembled as if it were being reforged by a celestial power. It is here we learn this man's name was Gillis Elrig, the one acclaimed as the strongest human in the entire world. But decades later, Gillis had become an old man. Now lying frail upon, he was encircled by his children and grandchildren. They whispered that his time was drawing near and that they had to accept his impending death. His eldest son, Gilliam, clutched his father's hand tightly. Gilus, the current patriarch of the Elragan family, told his son he did not wish to see sadness on their faces, explaining that his time had simply come. Gilliam forced a smile, his voice trembling as he explained that the manor had already become somber when their mother passed, and it would be even more desolate once their father was gone. But Gilus gently advised him not to let weakness overcome him, and not to be consumed by grief. Then, as a profound silence settled over the room, Gilus's mind drifted back to the golden fruit. He had to admit to himself that in the end, perhaps the myths of the ancient world were never meant to be trusted. Still, he felt a sense of fortune, for he had lived long enough to have a family to call his own. He told his loved ones that he had experienced a long and fulfilling life and that he held no regrets. But deep down, he knew this was a lie. Even in that moment, he could not bring himself to let go of his dream. If he had been granted more time, he would have continued to chase the peak of martial arts, the one dream that had always remained just out of his reach. And so, in his final moments, he clung to that desire until his very last breath. However, in a completely unbelievable twist, Gilus opened his eyes once more. Bewildered, he found himself wondering if he had merely dozed off. Everything felt alien. His room was different, his body felt unnaturally light, and his surroundings were unfamiliar. When he finally looked down at his hands, his eyes widened in sheer disbelief. These are not my hands. Am I a baby? He instantly grasped that he was in an extraordinary situation. But as a 10-star level martial artist, he couldn't fathom how anyone could have managed to do this to him without his knowledge. Then, a realization struck him. The divine dragon and the golden fruit. He finally understood. The fruit's effect wasn't immortality, but the gift of reincarnation. Though it was unexpected, the realization sent a wave of joy through him. He had been granted a second chance, a new life to conquer the peak he had failed to reach before. Soon, he became aware that he wasn't alone in the room. As he surveyed his surroundings, he recognized he was inside the annex of the Elragan Manor. Somehow, he had been reborn into his very own family. He then noticed the room was teeming with other infants. Just as he was contemplating why so many babies were gathered there, a group of maids entered, carrying feeding bottles. But strangely, instead of milk, they held a peculiar red liquid. Gilfus watched as the maids poured the crimson substance into the bottles. He assumed they were about to feed the infants, but then one of the maids suddenly brought out a goblin. They violently forced the bottle into the goblin's mouth. Moments later, the creature began to tremble uncontrollably as a red light burst from its body, and then it erupted in a shower of blood, splattering across the room. Gilfus was frozen in shock, his mind flooded with fear and confusion. What in the world was happening here? One of the maids calmly stated that the mixture would be safe, as long as they diluted it with the right amount of water. As they started feeding the red liquid to the other infants, another maid approached and picked up Gilfus himself. He glanced at the bottle and immediately knew it wasn't milk. The energy radiating from it was terrifyingly potent. He could sense that the liquid was dragon's blood, and it was far too dangerous for a newborn's delicate body. But before he could even react, the maid pushed the bottle into his mouth. On pure instinct, like any other infant, he began to drink. Instantly, an immense power surged through his veins, and his small body trembled from the searing pain, but Gilfus recognized it. The blood of ancient dragons was now coursing through him. This is dangerous, but perhaps this is also a golden opportunity. At first, he contemplated stopping, but then he realized if he could successfully absorb this power, he might just surpass his former self. He could finally reach the true summit of martial arts. With unwavering determination, he continued to drink the dragon's blood. His veins bulged, and his body convulsed in agony, but his will remained unbreakable. "Don't you dare underestimate me," he thought. "I am Gilfus Elreg." He repeated these words in his mind like a mantra, enduring the pain until miraculously he overcame it. The maid stared in utter disbelief as he continued to drink, somehow surviving what should have been a certain death sentence. Within his tiny body, two colossal draconic energies clashed violently, wrestling for dominance. When one finally overpowered the other, Gilfus could hardly fathom how easily he had absorbed the power. As the two dragon forces finally merged within him, he understood that this was the perfect chance. After swallowing the last drop, he couldn't believe he had survived the overwhelming pain. His body hadn't exploded, it had adapted. He then noticed a few other infants had also survived the ordeal, which made him smirk inwardly. So, he thought, never underestimate the survival instincts of a newborn. But as expected from an infant's body, exhaustion quickly overwhelmed him. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite his monumental triumph, Gilfus Elragan, the strongest human reborn, slowly drifted into a deep sleep. After 7 years had passed, he was now undergoing rigorous physical training. While performing one-handed push-ups, a massive boulder was balanced perfectly on his feet. Upon finally reaching his 1000th repetition, he launched the boulder skyward, and as it came hurtling back down onto his back, Gilfus was in awe of the sheer power his new body now commanded. Once known as Gilus Dragon, the former head of the Dragon clan, he now went by a new name, Zeke Dragon. Zeke contemplated how he had acquired such formidable physical strength at such a young age. He knew it was entirely thanks to the ancient dragon blood flowing through his veins, as it was said that every being in this world was born with something called a source of power. But the ancient dragon blood given to them as infants held a staggering concentration of that power. Those who survived the ordeal developed bodies far beyond the capabilities of ordinary humans. Housing the divine dragon's source of power, Zeke knew he had already eclipsed the limits he'd reached at the same age in his previous life. And as the only infant who had successfully consumed an entire bottle of the ancient dragon blood, his body underwent a profound transformation, one that surpassed even his own expectations. Yet despite his incredible progress, his greatest frustration was remaining a mere 1 star. After training so relentlessly, he had expected to reach at least 4 stars by this point. The star was the measure of an individual's source power. In this world, the human body was likened to a personal universe. The more stars one could ignite within that inner cosmos, the stronger they would become. However, as the number of stars increased, the difficulty of ascending to the next level grew exponentially. In his past life as Gilfus Dragon, Zeke had achieved the legendary 10 stars. He was the only person in history to have ever reached such a monumental level. Time really does fly, Zeke murmured to himself. He was now 7 years old. It's revealed that he is an illegitimate child of the dragon family's current patriarch. His mother had passed away when he was just an infant, and to this day, he had never even glimpsed his father's face, a failure in duty he found deeply irresponsible. What stunned him most, however, was the realization that a full 1,000 years had already elapsed since his reincarnation. The act of reincarnation itself was already beyond belief, but after 1,000 years, the world had changed drastically, becoming a true era where only the fittest survive. The greatest evidence of this was the ritual of feeding infants the blood of ancient dragons, followed by a perilous trial known as the Dragon Trial. Only those who endured both the consumption of dragon blood and the subsequent trial were deemed worthy to be educated and trained as elite dragon warriors. Logically, Zeke should have been one of them. Yet, whenever he questioned the servant assigned to his care about why no instructor had been sent for him, the servant would only reply that he was forbidden from answering such questions. Even after his 7th birthday, Zeke had never been given a single lesson. How peculiar, Zeke wondered aloud. Every other child who survived the dragon trial was supposed to begin their combat training immediately. All of them, except for him. He spent his days in isolation, with only a servant for company. When he pressed the servant on the matter, the man simply asked what was wrong with the arrangement. Zeke sighed and replied that for the time being, conditioning his body was far more crucial than combat training. In any case, he could always teach himself if he needed to. He was, after all, a 10-star warrior in his previous life. Zeke then requested information about the other children who survived, or any details about the main family that might shed some light on his situation, but once again, he was met with a wall of silence. The servant flatly refused, stating that he was not at liberty to disclose such sensitive information, causing a shadow of frustration to cross Zeke's face. "Will you forever deny me answers?" he questioned sharply. In response, the servant simply bowed his head, reiterating that he was forbidden to speak on such matters. "Isn't this cruel?" Zeke pressed on bitterly, "to treat me this way." Yet, the servant merely explained that he was only following his orders, as his sole duty was to see to Zeke's daily needs and nothing more. This servant, a formidable 3-star practitioner, could have effortlessly imparted basic combat techniques to the boy. However, Zeke held no interest in such rudimentary lessons. After 7 long years in the man's presence, he had become accustomed to the same robotic replies. At last, Zeke resolved to leave, making his way toward the forest. The servant remained silent, his gaze simply following Zeke's retreating form. "So, he's truly going to let me walk away?" Zeke mused, a flicker of irritation in his thoughts. Deep within the woods, he began to uproot wild, poisonous herbs, consuming them without a moment's hesitation. Just as always, the taste was repulsive, but this was a crucial part of his unique training regimen. Then, all at once, his senses flared. He was not alone. He drew a deep, steadying breath, forcing himself to remain composed as he silently chanted, "Be patient, be patient." He could distinctly feel the gaze of someone, or something, fixed upon him from a distance, scrutinizing his every action. No matter how he tried to dismiss it, the feeling of being watched clung to him. After several moments passed, Zeke let out a sigh. "They actually followed me all the way out here, huh?" Unable to tolerate the surveillance any longer, he finally called out into the quiet, "You might as well show yourself if you have something to say. With that, he slipped into the tall grass, concealing his position. A few moments later, while crouched low, Zeke detected a power. Dark and oppressive aura emanating from nearby. As his eyes darted toward its source, he spotted a creature known as an anger boar. What is that strange aura? He wondered to himself. The inky black mist swirling around the beast was unlike anything he had ever witnessed, not even 1,000 years prior. While the anger boar was busy grazing, Zeke abruptly rose to his feet and revealed his presence, startling the prodded creature. It charged him instantly, but instead of fear, a confident smile spread across Zeke's face. He was genuinely thrilled by the prospect of a fight. The boar lunged, but Zeke sidestepped the attack with ease, gathering a brilliant golden energy into his fist. With a powerful strike, he unleashed an explosive force that ripped clean through the anger boar's body. He couldn't suppress the grin that followed. At the result, his attack was far more potent than he had anticipated. Even as a mere 1-star, his destructive power already surpassed that of most other practitioners at the same rank. Heaving the slain beast onto his shoulder, Zeke muttered to himself, "It will be even better once I manage to raise my star level." He was growing weary of 7 years spent being ignored and ostracized by the dragon family. He began to wonder if the time had come to leave this place and forge his own path, perhaps even venturing toward the distant ocean. Meanwhile, far off, in the distance, a cloaked figure observed from the concealment of the shadows. "What is the deal with that boy?" he murmured. "Even without any formal training, he has managed to reach the 1-star level, and he dispatched that anger boar with just a single blow." What perplexed the observer even more was how Zeke had seemingly sensed his presence. "That child is no ordinary boy," he noted quietly to himself, recalling that Zeke's mother had passed away young, and his father, the current head of the family, had never shown the slightest interest in him. Lacking any proper guidance, the boy should never have developed such strength. Nevertheless, as the son of the dragon head, illegitimate or not, Zeke was destined to remain under the clan's surveillance, and that was precisely why an operative like him had been assigned to monitor the boy's every move. A voice whispered from the shadows, revealing a secret: an illegitimate son, yet one who carries the blood of the family head. Could that be the source of his immense strength? The man chuckled, his curiosity piqued. "This boy," he mused, "will certainly be fascinating to observe as he grows." With that thought, the figure vanished back into the darkness. Meanwhile, at Zeke's home, the boy was gathering his meager belongings, preparing to set out on his journey. But suddenly, his senses flared, detecting several formidable auras just outside his door. 3 4-star practitioners and a much stronger 1-star warrior. What could they possibly want here? He wondered, creeping silently towards the door. Overhearing their conversation, he was surprised to hear them remarking on the clean, fresh air of the remote area and how peaceful it was, thanks to the absence of any nearby rifts. Hearing this, Zeke concluded they weren't assassins. They didn't sound like malicious individuals in the slightest. Deciding a direct approach was best, he flung open his door and demanded, "What business do you have here?" His sudden appearance startled the group, causing them to freeze. It was then that Zeke's eyes caught the emblems stitched onto their attire, the unmistakable mark of the Dragon clan. "Ellen," he muttered under his breath, his mind racing to figure out their purpose. The men, recovering from their shock, swiftly bowed in respect. "It is an honor to finally meet you, young Master Zeke," their leader announced respectfully. "We have been dispatched to escort you to the location of your examination." "An examination?" The word hung in the air, and Zeke's brow furrowed in confusion, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. "They expect me to take an exam," he grumbled to himself, "when they haven't taught me a single thing." A few days later, Zeke found himself in a state of disbelief, standing once more before the grand main estate of the Dragon family. It was made clear that he hadn't been brought back to reside in the main house. His return was for an entirely different reason. Before being allowed entry, he was instructed to change out of his travel-worn clothes. This entire situation revolved around a place known as the Dragon's Nest. For 1,000 years, the Dragon family had maintained this prestigious school, an institution that educated all branches of their vast bloodline. Every child born with a connection to the Dragon name, no matter how distant, dreamed of gaining admission to this hallowed Dragon's Nest to receive a formal education upon reaching the age of 7. And as fate would have it, today was the very day of the Academy's entrance ceremony. Zeke had been brought here specifically to participate in the entrance examination. Even though he had received no training or knowledge from the modern generation of his family, taking the exam was compulsory. The realization immediately sank Zeke's spirits, as he understood the true purpose behind his summons. Why now? He wondered, just when he had resolved to leave everything behind and explore the world. As he sat brooding by the school gate, a boy from Outer village cautiously approached. It was Rangus, and he gently asked Zeke if he was all right, noting the troubled look on his face. When Zeke questioned his identity, the boy formally introduced himself as Rangus, explaining that he'd come over simply because Zeke appeared to be deeply troubled. "Is that so?" Zeke responded with a detached air. As he spoke, he observed the flow of energy within Rangus's body and quietly noted to himself that while the boy seemed timid, he possessed an exceptionally keen sense of perception. Shifting his tone, Zeke then apologized for his preoccupation, introducing himself in turn. He admitted that his mind was in chaos, as he had absolutely no idea what would be required of them in the exam. "Is that all it is?" Rangus asked, a hint of his own nervousness about the test creeping into his voice. Despite his nerves, he explained that the annual entrance exam for the Dragon's Nest rarely deviated from its usual format. But when Zeke, upon admitting he knew nothing about the exam, Rangus was left utterly stunned by the idea of someone taking the test with zero knowledge. Wasn't that an incredibly reckless and dangerous gamble? Just as Rangus prepared to explain the exam's details, a loud and arrogant voice cut through the air, interrupting them. A boastful boy was shouting, branding Rangus as a weakling. Rangus spun around and immediately recognized the source of the taunt. It was Retin, another native of Ortiscale village, with a mocking tone. Retin questioned why Rangus was even present, suggesting he must have wandered into the dragon's nest by mistake. He even advised him that it would be wiser to return home before he ended up getting hurt. I'm here to take the entrance exam, Rangus declared, though his voice faltered as Retin closed the distance, sneeringly asking if he was serious about taking the test. Retin then clutched his stomach and erupted into laughter, proclaiming it was impossible for someone like him to pass. He then took his insults a step further, targeting Rangus's father by saying, "Your old man is a pseudo-dragon, isn't he? What could the son of a mere pseudo-dragon ever hope to accomplish?" Rangus's fists trembled with restrained fury, a detail that did not escape Zeke's notice. It was then revealed that the dragon family adhered to a strict and absolute hierarchy. The ranks were clearly defined: novice whelp dragons at the bottom, followed by regular soldier child dragons, and then captain-level adult dragons. Above them were the executive elder dragons, simply known as elders, while at the very bottom of this pecking order were the pseudo-dragons, those who had either failed to enter or graduate from the dragon's nest, and were thus deemed immature and incomplete. Despite this stigma, Rangus had long cherished the dream of proving that even those labeled pseudo-dragons were true dragons in their own right. Zeke, hearing this, was intrigued and questioned why Retin was so certain of Rangus's failure before the exam had even begun. "And just who the hell do you think you are?" Retin shot back, demanding to know if Zeke had a problem. Unfazed, Zeke calmly stated he was simply curious as to why Retin was so utterly confident that Rangus was incapable of passing. Retin jabbed a finger toward Rangus and bellowed that the reason was obvious. He was nothing but a weakling. Zeke tilted his head, feigning confusion, and asked if he had truly called Rangus weak, because from what he could perceive, Rangus actually seemed more powerful than either of them. Upon hearing this, Rangus's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. It was the very first time anyone had ever stood up for him like the arrogant boys bristled with anger, questioning if Zeke was seriously suggesting they were weaker than the son of a pseudo-dragon, a being they considered utterly inferior. But before the situation could escalate any further, a man's arrival captured everyone's attention. This was the adult dragon examiner, who announced that the dragon's nest entrance exam was set to begin and instructed all participants to register immediately to receive their numbers. As Retin stormed off, he shot a venomous glare at Zeke, warning him that he would not forget his face. Zeke simply sighed, commenting that there was no need for such anger, and remarking that the children of this era seemed to possess remarkably short fuses. Rangus quickly interjected, "That's not so strange, we're all about the same age after all." Rangus then added that anyone would get angry if they were told they were weaker than him. "Is that really so?" Zeke mused quietly. Since the entrance exam was mandatory, it seemed they had no choice but to participate. However, Zeke was taken aback when Rangus mentioned it was actually possible to skip the test entirely. At this, Zeke's eyes widened, and Rangus finally understood that Zeke was truly clueless about the entire process. Rangus strongly advised him that it might be better to withdraw now, before he got seriously hurt. But Zeke just replied with unshakable confidence that a genius such as himself would never back down from a challenge. Rangus could only shake his head, muttering that Zeke was truly feeling overly confident despite being completely in the dark about the exam. Zeke just laughed it off, saying that no matter what the test was, they needed to hurry because it was about to begin. Left with no other option, Rangus reluctantly agreed. Upon reaching the testing, the examiner explained that the test was deceptively simple. To pass, all they had to do was leave a scratch on the stone's position behind him. There was a catch, however: no personal weapons were permitted, only those supplied by the academy. That being said, they were free to use their bare hands if they dared, but every participant was limited to just 3 attempts. "Is that all?" Zeke remarked, his voice laced with disappointment. Having endured a dragon's trial as a mere infant, he had been anticipating something far more harrowing and intense. This, by comparison, seemed almost laughably easy. The examiner then called forward the first participant and gave him the signal to start. The young man, though visibly nervous, struck the massive stone with every ounce of his strength. The resounding clang of metal on rock echoed through the grounds, ringing in everyone's ears. But to the absolute shock of the onlookers, the boy's sword instantly snapped in two, and the violent recoil completely shattered his arm. Zeke was left speechless by the brutal outcome. As the boy writhed on the ground in agony, the examiner impassively stated that he still had 2 attempts remaining and inquired if he wanted to proceed. However, seeing as the boy was unable to even get to his feet, the examiner declared him a failure and ordered the staff to clear the area. While the wounded applicant was unceremoniously dragged away, the next number was announced. Rangus began to tremble, terrified by what he had just witnessed. Zeke, on the other hand, was growing annoyed. "So this is their idea of an exam?" he muttered under his breath. He then questioned what kind of stones they were actually using. Rangus explained that the stones were said to have regenerative properties, causing any scratch to disappear in a heartbeat. Furthermore, they could reflect physical force back at the attacker, amplified 100-fold. Zeke immediately protested that such a material was completely overkill for a simple entrance exam, but Rangus clarified that it was still possible to damage them, provided that one could perfectly circulate their source power throughout their entire body before launching an attack. I understand now, Zeke murmured. He finally grasped that the circulation of source power was infinitely more crucial than raw martial skill for this particular test. Surveying the other applicants, he concluded that only a handful were likely to pass, and that included those arrogant boys from before. As the test wore on, the number of failures far outweighed the successes, with many suffering severe injuries from the stone's powerful reflective ability. After a short while, the examiner finally called out Zeke's number. "It's my turn," Zeke announced, a calm smile playing on his lips. Rangus, still a nervous wreck, asked if he was certain he didn't want to withdraw. But Zeke simply strode forward, reassuring him not to worry. As he drew near the examiner, the man's eyes widened in disbelief. A powerful aura began to flare around Zeke, offering a faint glimpse of the overwhelming might he possessed in his past life as Gilas. The examiner, recovering, told him to step up and select a weapon, but Zeke waved off the offer, stating it wasn't necessary. He declared that his fists alone would be more than enough. A ripple of disbelief spread through the crowd. They reasoned that no matter how adept he was at circulating source power, there was absolutely no way he could even scratch the stone with his bare hands. His fists would undoubtedly shatter on him. Some of the onlookers whispered that not only his fists, but his entire arms would be obliterated, a thought that made Rangus sick with worry for his friend. This fear was quickly followed by a wave of anger at himself, as he believed he should have physically stopped Zeke from making such a reckless decision, from any harm. With a nod, the examiner signaled the start of the trial. As Zeke stepped up to the colossal stone, he placed his palm against its surface, marveling at the unfamiliar material. It felt ancient, and he mused that it must have been forged over 1,000 years in the past. Even so, he acknowledged that many aspects of this current era remained a mystery to him. But that was a thought for another time. Without hesitation, he began to channel his source power, concentrating it all into his clenched fist. While Rangus watched on, trembling with nervous anticipation for Zeke's fate, our hero was actually brimming with exhilaration. For the very first time, he was free to unleash his true, unbridled power. He resolved to use this enigmatic stone as a benchmark for his current capabilities. Rangus's eyes shot wide open yet again as Zeke unleashed the first form of his dragon destruction combat technique, the burst strike, directly into the stone. An overwhelming torrent of energy exploded outward from the point of impact. Shards of the obliterated rock rained down in every direction as a violent shockwave kicked up a blinding storm of dust and debris that choked the air. Both awestruck and on high alert, Rangus hastily threw up a guard to protect himself from the fallout, while the examiner's own eyes bulged in utter disbelief at the spectacle he had just witnessed. When the thick cloud of dust finally started to clear, Zeke was revealed, standing with a confident smile on his face. He casually remarked that the technique he'd just used was still a bit too powerful for his body to handle. In spite of the grievous damage to his hand, he let out a self-deprecating laugh, acknowledging that he clearly needed to undergo far more rigorous training. The other onlookers were rendered completely speechless by the display. Retton's expression was a mixture of shock and sheer annoyance that Zeke had just pulverized the enchanted stone. A woman observing from the sidelines commented aloud that Zeke was a truly fascinating individual. While the rest of the crowd was still reeling from the shocking turn of events, Zeke waited with a cheerful expression for the examiner to announce his score, but the man was still frozen in a state of shock. The very stone Zeke had just obliterated was famous for its self-regenerating properties, and the only people capable of shattering it were supposed to be warriors who had attained the 4-star level or beyond. And yet, before him, stood a mere boy who had accomplished the seemingly impossible. "He's nothing but an illegitimate son," the examiner muttered under his breath, before wondering if Zeke's incredible power stemmed from the blood of the family head that still coursed through his veins. He also couldn't shake the feeling that the technique Zeke had employed was strangely familiar. Still lost in his daze, the examiner failed to respond immediately, prompting an impatient Zeke to call out and demand his result. Jolted back to reality, the examiner finally announced that Zeke had officially passed the examination. Another official then approached and handed Zeke a small vial filled with a mysterious green liquid. Zeke, intrigued, asked what it was, but the man just curtly asked him to move along, stating he was blocking the path. Irritated by the dismissal, Zeke frowned and grumbled to himself about how rude everyone in this era seemed to be. But before he could voice any more complaints, Rangus rushed over, his face beaming with excitement as he showered Zeke with praise for his performance. Zeke just grinned proudly and brushed it off, saying it was nothing more than child's play. He then held up the vial, asking what the liquid was, and Rangus explained it was a healing potion, the standard issue remedy of the prestigious Eldragon family. A healing potion, Zeke echoed. Rangus nodded in confirmation. Considering Zeke's status as an illegitimate son, his first suspicion was that it might be poison. Still, since Rangus himself had vouched for its authenticity, he began to wonder if it could actually be a potent spiritual medicine. The legendary elixir known as Cloud-Piercing Clarity Wood was famously crafted from exceptionally rare materials, herbs found only in hidden realms, and the pure source power of divine beasts, along with the very essence of elusive phantom beasts. When consumed, it could heal not only fresh wounds but also old, lingering scars and injuries. On top of all that, it was said to enhance one's source power. Because the ingredients were so scarce and the process was so incredibly complex, elixirs of this caliber were almost never seen. After drinking it, Zeke was astounded by its immediate effect on his body. "Is this actually a spirit medicine?" he asked Rangus. Rangus replied that he wasn't familiar with the term spirit medicine, But he was absolutely certain that the Ragan family's potions were of a much higher quality than any commercial ones found outside their lands. Ranges then asked if the potion's effect had truly surprised Zeke that much. Of course, Zeke confirmed, explaining that it had mended both his serious injuries and the accumulated strain from his training. Still, he observed that unlike a spirit medicine, it didn't appear to boost his source power. Rangus, however, remarked that he was far more amazed by Zeke himself, to which Zeke just chuckled and told him not to jest. Zeke mused internally that the potion's existence proved just how far knowledge had progressed over the last 1,000 years. Rangus praised Zeke's power once more, and Zeke boldly declared that his ambition was to become the strongest being in existence. Soon after, the examiner announced that Retin had also passed the test, as had his companions. Zeke had expected as much, but then Rangus began to tremble with nerves when his number was called. Despite his fear, he steeled himself and walked to the front. Watching his stiff, awkward movements, Zeke wondered why Rangus was so tense, then shouted encouragement, telling him to trust in his own strength. Flustered, Rangus begged him to lower his voice. When Rangus chose a sword as his weapon, Zeke watched intently, wondering what he was thinking. Once the examiner gave the signal, Rangus struck the stone, but as he had feared, he failed on his first attempt. Determined, he rose for another try, but his strike simply glanced off the stone, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. His hands shook from the stone's powerful rebound. Retin and his cronies erupted into laughter, saying it was just as they'd predicted. The son of a pseudo-dragon was nothing more than a pale imitation himself. They mocked him relentlessly, telling him to just give up. Retin even directed a sneer at Zeke, asking if this was the same man he claimed could pass, and if Rangus was really supposed to be stronger than them. Zeke remained silent for a moment before coldly telling them to stop their pointless chatter. The examiner informed Rangus that he had only one attempt left and asked if he still wished to continue. Rangus couldn't speak, overwhelmed by a crushing sense of shame and the ridicule from the others. He lowered his head in defeat, but then Zeke strode up to him and demanded to know what he was doing. He grilled Rangus on why he was using a sword instead of a spear, why he would pick a weapon that didn't suit him, and why he'd even attempt the test with no plan at all. Retin watched with a mocking gaze as Zeke told Rangus that in his current condition, he wouldn't even be able to scratch the stone no matter how many times he tried. Retin and his group howled with laughter again, calling Zeke an idiot and reminding him that Rangus knew nothing about using a spear. His weak father only ever taught him swordsmanship, they taunted, and changing weapons now wouldn't alter the outcome. But Zeke paid their jeers no mind and called out to the examiner, asking if it was against any rules against changing weapons. The examiner confirmed there were none. Well then, it seems Rangus is in luck, Zeke declared with a confident grin, turning his attention to the young man. Rangus imposed a simple question. Did he trust him? In that moment, a flood of painful memories, all the scorn he and his father had endured surged through Rangus's mind. Clenching his jaw, he straightened his posture and declared that he would put his faith in Zeke. He would take up the spear, just as Zeke had instructed. Rangus revealed that his own father had never succeeded in entering the dragon's nest, a failure that led people to mockingly label him a pseudo-dragon. Yet, despite the constant humiliation, his father had borne every insult with dignity, all for the sake of raising Rangus properly. This was the very reason Rangus had vowed to show the world that he, the son his father had so carefully nurtured, was a true dragon in his own right. He rose to his feet again, his grip on the spear tightening with resolve, and proclaimed that this very day, he would prove that neither he nor his father were frauds. He understood that attempting the test again with a sword would inevitably lead to the same humiliating result. And so, he chose to place his complete trust in Zeke. There was just one small problem. He had absolutely no idea how to wield a spear. Zeke called out to him, gesturing toward the enchanted stone with a simple instruction. He told Rangus there was no complex technique required. All he had to do was thrust the spear directly into the stone, without a second thought. Just run it straight through, Zeke commanded with unwavering confidence. Rangus's knuckles whitened as he tightened his hold on the spear. He was well aware that under normal conditions, a simple stab wouldn't even scratch the stone's surface, let alone cause any real damage, especially given its powerful regenerative properties. But Zeke was the very first person who had ever defended him, despite them having only met that day. This feeling of support was entirely new to him, and because of it, he made a choice. He chose to put his absolute faith in Zeke and, for once, in his own untapped potential. He began to channel his source power into this, and immediately sensed something extraordinary. For all the years he had trained with a sword, he had never been able to imbue it with this much source energy, an amount he was now channeling into the spear with surprising ease. With a powerful war cry, Rangus unleashed his full might, driving the spear toward the stone with every ounce of his being. Retin nearly doubled over with laughter, mocking that it was exactly as he had predicted. A simple change of weapon, he sneered, wouldn't be enough to pass, but Rangus didn't falter. He could feel a surge of something different, something incredibly powerful. The spear felt less like a tool and more like a natural extension of his own arm. Then, as he poured all of his strength into the final push, the spearhead plunged completely through the enchanted stone. The look of utter shock on Retin's face and on the faces of his cronies was absolutely priceless. Even the seasoned examiners couldn't conceal their wide-eyed astonishment, a flicker of delight crossing their faces at the incredible display. Rangus hadn't merely chipped the stone, he had driven his spear clean through it. Zeke was the first to offer his praise. Rangus himself was in a state of disbelief, struggling to process what had just happened, Even as the examiner made the official declaration that he had passed, Rangus still turned to Zeke, asking in a stunned voice if it was real. A wide smile spread across Zeke's face as he slung an arm around his shoulder and confirmed his victory. Overcome with a wave of pure elation, Rangus fought back tears and pulled Zeke into a tight hug, shouting again and again that he had actually done it, that he had passed the test. Retin and his crew, meanwhile, were refusing to accept the reality of the situation. They dismissed it as a fluke, but Retin remained ominously silent, his entire body trembling with suppressed rage. He couldn't stand them. Just as Zeke had predicted, Rangus was indeed more powerful than them, and his result was undeniably superior. It was then that the examiner stepped forward to announce the next stage, announced the official conclusion of the test, then declared that the entrance ceremony would commence shortly. Zeke immediately questioned if the test was truly finished, and Rangus replied that it seemed to be, but added there would likely be more trials once they were inside the dragon's nest. Soon after, a group of men emerged from a shadowed hallway. As they stepped into the light, the examiner announced that the head of the dragon family would now deliver a speech to congratulate those who had passed. The moment Zeke laid eyes on the man, he asked who the person with the cold, dark expression was. Rangus, clearly unnerved, replied that it was the family head himself. "So that's the family head," Zeke remarked. "Why does he look like that? He isn't even smiling, he looks colder than ice." Rangus instantly clamped a hand over Zeke's mouth, whispering desperately that it was best to stay quiet and repeating his plea for him to stop talking. Zeke simply nodded. Looking again at the group, he observed that these individuals represented the current power of the dragon family. Some of them were at the 7-star level, while others were at the 6-star rank. To Zeke, their collective strength was certainly impressive, especially since the current family patriarch, Balsa Dragon, was an 8-star level powerhouse. A full 1,000 years ago, only a mere handful of people had ever managed to reach that level. Still, Zeke was uncertain how many such individuals existed in this era. "I don't like this family head," Zeke muttered to himself, but before he could say anything else, Rangus tried to silence him again. Zeke sighed, thinking to himself that he never expected this man to be his father in this lifetime. A dark and fiery aura began to radiate from Balsa's body, making the entire area feel incredibly heavy. The examiner quickly ordered everyone to maintain absolute silence because Master Balsa was about to speak. When Balsa stepped forward, he uttered only a few words. They must all strive to become the very flesh and blood of the dragon family. As he spoke, the terrifying pressure of his aura washed across the hall. Zeke was not affected, but many of the examinees trembled in fear, some struggling just to breathe as their bodies froze under the immense pressure. Zeke noticed that even Rangus was being affected by it. He couldn't believe how easily everyone around him was being overwhelmed by the family head's presence alone. More than that, Zeke could sense an intense hatred concealed within Balsa's aura. He didn't know the reason for it, but even he couldn't bring himself to like the man who was supposedly his father. As Balsa turned away, another man stepped forward and captured everyone's attention. He had blonde hair and cheerfully thanked Balsa for his words, then said that Master Balsa had high expectations for all of them, and that just like his master, he would also keep his own speech brief. As Zeke wondered who this man was, the speaker simply told everyone to train hard and grow stronger. "That's it?" one of the examiners muttered. The man just smiled and said that people who worry too much about the small things tend to go bald early, didn't bother with any long speeches. Zeke couldn't understand what was wrong with these people, but at least the atmosphere in the hall had finally lightened up. The examiner then announced that the new students would now be assigned to their dormitories. Everyone whose number was called was instructed to head there immediately. Zeke asked if they weren't all going to be staying in the same dormitory, and Rangus explained that there were 4 of them: the East, West, South, and North dorm. All students admitted to the academy were granted residence in one of the 4 halls. When Zeke's number was announced, he rose from his seat and waved a brief goodbye to Rangus. He had been assigned to the East Hall, and as he made his way through the corridor, he noted to himself how much the academy had changed over the last 1,000 years. Upon finding his room, he mused that he must have gotten lost, given how long it took him to arrive, and figured his roommate had likely already settled in. When he swung the door open, he cheerfully greeted his new roommate and offered a quick apology for being late. He then declared that starting today, they would be sharing the room, but to his utter astonishment, his new roommate was revealed to be Rangus himself. Zeke couldn't suppress a laugh, commenting that it felt like fate was constantly pushing them together. He then asked if anything else was scheduled for the day, and Rangus confirmed that their training was set to commence tomorrow. "Is that so?" Zeke remarked nonchalantly, prompting Rangus to question if he hadn't been listening to the examiner's explanation earlier. Zeke admitted that he had ignored it on purpose. Rangus let out a sigh and said they ought to get some rest, since their training would start bright and early. As Zeke stared out the window, his mind drifted to his plan of escaping the Reagan family to travel the world. But after discovering the existence of the enchanted stone with regenerative properties and the miraculous healing potion, he realized he'd already uncovered many intriguing things during the exam. He reasoned that if he truly wanted to comprehend all the changes that had taken place over the past 1,000 years, then perhaps staying with the Reagan family for a while longer might not be such a bad idea. 1 month passed at the academy, and the training only continued to grow more grueling, which involved tasks like holding heavy dumbbells in both hands. The instructor explained that the dragon's breath technique he was imparting was one of the most significant techniques ever conceived by the 15th head of the Reagan family. After reminding them that they were required to master the technique under any and all conditions, the instructor's attention was suddenly drawn to a few particular students. Some of them, he noted, had already perfected the dragon's breath, particularly the young woman he referred to as Master Leah. Her overflowing aura of energy suggested she was on the cusp of reaching the 2-star level. But besides her, one other student caught his eye, forcing him to do a double take. Zeke was training by not only holding the dumbbells but also balancing enormous stones on his head and arms. The instructor stared, completely dumbfounded, and muttered to himself that the blood of the main family truly ran through Zeke's veins. However, it was widely known that no one had ever taught Zeke a single thing since he was a child, which was why this entire spectacle felt so utterly foreign to him. Zeke, on the other hand, was having his own moment of shock, finding it hard to believe that the technique he once knew as the Dragon King's breathing technique had been further refined by the subsequent family heads and was now being taught to the other branches of the family. From Zeke's perspective, breathing techniques were methods used to gather the source of power from the surroundings and absorb it into the body. Once circulated, this source power would then fortify a person's own internal energy. The effectiveness of these techniques was entirely dependent on an individual's inherent ability and intellect. That was precisely why the great families of this world guarded their techniques so fiercely, never permitting them to be learned by outsiders or those not of their bloodline. That was exclusive to their bloodline. Zeke also deduced that this version of the dragon's breath was a safe and simplified technique, one that was easy enough to master. However, it was practically useless to him since it could only be utilized while stationary. In contrast, his own version of the breathing technique enabled him to manipulate the ambient source power even in motion. This crucial difference made it far more intricate and potent in real combat, but also significantly more difficult to learn. In fact, only a select few had ever truly mastered it. He surmised that the current generation must have streamlined his original version, making it accessible even to the family's branch members. And it was clear that this decision had ultimately helped strengthen the Eldragon family as a whole. Zeke couldn't help but feel a peculiar sense of satisfaction. He had never imagined that the techniques he pioneered so long ago would still hold such an impact even after 1,000 years had passed. It sparked his curiosity, making him wonder if the other martial arts he created had also evolved in a similar fashion. How interesting, he mused to himself, a slight smile playing on his lips. All the while, Laika was quietly observing Zeke from a distance. Later, inside the bustling cafeteria, the other students stared in astonishment at the sheer volume of food Zeke was consuming. As he relentlessly devoured his meal, he noticed Rangus sitting silently across the table. "What's the matter?" Zeke inquired. "You won't get any stronger if you don't eat." Rangus merely asked if Zeke didn't find his own stamina to be unusual. "That's all it is," Zeke replied matter-of-factly. "If you want to get stronger, you just need to eat more. Train harder. Push your limits." He then offered some of his own food to, but his friend politely declined, insisting he'd already had enough. As Zeke mused about how some of the students were already highly trained before even setting foot in the academy, a young woman suddenly approached their table. "You're quite the impressive specimen," Laika commented, her tone a mixture of calm and confidence. Zeke blinked. "And you are?" he asked nonchalantly. Rangus nearly choked on his food, whispering with a sense of panic, "You don't recognize her?" "That's Master Laika, the daughter of the family head, Lord Balza himself." "Oh," Zeke responded with utter indifference. "And what am I supposed to do about that?" "I don't know the girl." Rangus began to sweat bullets, hissing, "You can't speak to her like that. Master Laika is a prime candidate to become the next family head. She's not someone you can just address so casually. Is that right?" Zeke countered. "Well, as it happens, I'm a child of the family head too. An illegitimate one, but still." Rangus froze mid-motion, completely stunned, while Laika's eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Is that the truth?" she inquired. "Are you truly the family head's illegitimate son?" The narrator's voice chimed in, like a Typhon Eldragon, one of the leading candidates to inherit the Eldragon family, was now standing before the very man in question. "Why would I lie about something like that?" Zeke retorted with a shrug. Laika's brow furrowed. "Then explain this. How could a mere illegitimate child like you shatter the magic stone with your bare hands? How could someone not from a prominent family possess such overwhelming strength?" "Because I'm Zeke," he replied with unshakable confidence, turning his attention back to Rangus. "Stop gawking and finish your meal." Both Laika and Rangus were struck silent for a moment, and then a smile blossomed on Laika's face. "You truly are an interesting man," she declared, before taking a seat right beside him. "How would you like to serve under me? I'll make you one of my retainers." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly would that entail?" "I want you to join my faction," she clarified. "Become my ally, and I, in turn, will be your patron. Every illegitimate child needs powerful allies and influence to survive, don't they? Use your strength to secure my position as the next family head. Once I succeed, I'll ensure your own ambitions are realized." Zeke didn't miss a beat, flatly rejecting her offer. Laika's brow furrowed in annoyance. "Why refuse? Don't tell me you're aiming for the position of family head yourself." As her aura erupted with a faint crackling energy, Zeke could sense she was on the verge of reaching the 2-star level. To command such an aura at her age was undeniably impressive, yet Zeke remained completely unfazed. "You're free to pursue whatever you wish," he stated, "but I have zero interest in becoming the family head or holding any other title." "And why is that?" Laika demanded coldly. Zeke drove his knife into the table with a thud. "Because I have no need to serve anyone," he declared, his voice steady yet razor-sharp. "I am the absolute strongest." A hush fell over the entire cafeteria. Even Laika was stunned by the wave of pressure she felt. For a brief moment, Zeke's sheer presence had completely overwhelmed her. Rangus quickly intervened, trying to de-escalate the tense situation, pleading for both of them to calm down. But Laika wasn't one to retreat, her pride stung and her anger ignited by the public humiliation. Fueled by her rage, she officially challenged Zeke to a duel. Zeke, however, seemed utterly indifferent and simply went back to his meal. Just a few moments later, a buzz of excitement swept through the campus. Where is everyone headed in such a rush? One student wondered aloud. To the training grounds, another student replied. A duel is about to break out between members of the younger generation, and Master Laika herself is one of the combatants. You mean Master Laika of the Typhon family? Someone exclaimed in disbelief. Who on earth would be bold enough to challenge her? As the crowd gathered at the training grounds, whispers filled the air as everyone eagerly tried to identify her mysterious opponent. Zeke, on the other hand, was still finding it hard to believe that Laika was genuinely serious about this duel. Are you really okay with this? Rangus asked, his voice laced with anxiety. You're about to fight Master Laika, Rangus stressed. You can call her Master all you want, but I still have no idea who she is, Zeke retorted bluntly. Rangus sighed in exasperation. You should at least feign some respect, especially now that I know you're also a son of the family head. Do whatever you like, Zeke said dismissively. Still, Rangus pressed on, trying to explain the gravity of the situation. What's crucial right now is that you understand exactly who you're facing. Master Laika isn't some random opponent. She is the daughter of Lord Balza Ragan, and she also carries the prestigious bloodline of the place. Typhon family, one of the 4 great houses that support the Ragans. She is a true prodigy who has mastered every form of the Connaught. Typhon family's hereditary lightning greatsword technique from a very young age, just like her father's other children, she possesses a terrifying level of talent. Zeke simply tilted his head. I didn't catch a single word of that, except for the part where she's the family head's daughter. Rangus stared at him, dumbfounded. How could you possibly not know any of this? Because I just don't, Zeke stated plainly. So stop asking. Rangus blinked in confusion as Zeke suddenly broke into laughter. But since I'm completely in the dark about her, he said with a wide grin, that just means this fight is going to be way more fun. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? All Rangus could do was sigh with worry. No matter how powerful, Master Laika was on a completely different level. Why did you even agree to her challenge? He asked desperately. I never backed down from, Zeke answered simply. Besides, it looks like my opponent is ready to go. At that very moment, Laika stood with her greatsword planted firmly in the ground. Her aura flared to life, with faint arcs of lightning crackling around her. Are you two finished with your little chat? She demanded coldly. As Laika shouted, asking if they were finally done talking, Zeke simply replied that he was ready. Rangus, trembling with a mix of fear and shock, immediately scrambled away from the pair, shouting a final warning for Zeke to be careful. Zeke then turned to face his opponent, to Laika, demanding to know why she was so fixated on fighting him. Laika stated her ambition plainly. She wanted to become the next head of the Ragan family, and to do that, she had to defeat Zeke and force him to become her follower. What does that have to do with me? Zeke asked, confused about his role in her quest for the family's leadership. Laika retorted, questioning if he was genuinely clueless about their family's political landscape, or if being an illegitimate child was the reason for his profound ignorance. Zeke flatly admitted he was, confessing that his knowledge about their family was severely lacking. Taking this as her cue, Laika began to lay out the situation. She revealed that, including, there were 5 candidates in the running to be the next family head. Apart from Zeke, all her other siblings were aligned with the 4 major branch families of the Ragan clan. The position of family head was so prestigious that it had become a focal point of intense conflict among these branches. For this very reason, all of Zeke's siblings had entered the Dragon's Nest to hone their skills and act as representatives for their respective families. As the succession war had devolved into a fierce free-for-all, Laika needed powerful allies to have any chance of standing against her older brothers. It dawned on Zeke that this was a classic power struggle between the 4 main branches of the Ragan family. He found the entire situation far too convoluted and wasn't certain he even wanted to grasp its complexities. Laika pressed on, stating that as a candidate for the headship, she had to bolster not just her knowledge and power, but also her influence by amassing a following of strong warriors. With nothing more to say, she launched herself at Zeke, declaring her intent to defeat him right then and there to make him one of her loyal subordinates. But Zeke gracefully evaded her powerful blow, along with the subsequent storm of attacks that followed. Even so, Laika was relentless, giving him no room to escape. The spectators were in utter disbelief at the scene unfolding. The speed of their movements was simply astonishing. Laika's attacks, despite her wielding a massive great, flowed with a smooth and rapid intensity that defied its weight. As they watched the clash between the siblings, the audience began to whisper in awe of Laika's precise control over her source power, observing how her strikes grew progressively faster and stronger with each passing moment. They could only admire the sheer power of a true daughter of the family head, hailing from one of the main branches. Some even declared that the fight's outcome was already decided. What they failed to see, however, was that Laika herself was becoming increasingly agitated. She couldn't fathom how Zeke was dodging every single one of her attacks, nor could she shake the feeling that he was simply toying with her. Ranges, watching from the sideline, couldn't help but be impressed, his earlier anxieties vanishing as he observed Zeke's calm and collected movements. Zeke then casually remarked that the martial arts Laika was demonstrating were unlike any style he'd witnessed before. He acknowledged that her speed was far beyond that of any typical 1-star level fighter, but his commentary only enraged Laika, who yelled at him to stop talking and take their fight seriously. Zeke clenched his fist, replying that he was completely focused, which was exactly why he could deliver such a powerful blow so effortlessly. His fist connected squarely, and the impact made Laika gag instantly. She crumpled to her knees, desperately clutching her sword and her stomach in agony. The crowd gasped in shock and erupted into frantic whispers, wondering what just happened, wondering how Zeke had so effortlessly dodged every single one of her attacks and just who this enigmatic young man really was. As Laika struggled to her feet, she demanded to know why none of her blows were connecting, especially when she knew for a fact that she was much faster than other one-star fighters. By all logic, there was no way Zeke should have been able to keep pace with her. Zeke conceded the point, admitting she was undoubtedly faster than any one-star he had ever witnessed. Yet, in his eyes, she was still just another one-star. "You're a one-star too," Laika retorted angrily, insisting he shouldn't be able to keep up with her movements. "There's a simple reason for that," Zeke replied coolly. "The subtle movements of your eyes, and even the minute shifts in your muscles. I can read it all. By observing these tiny details, I can predict what you're going to do next. It all comes down to experience. Don't make me laugh." Laika screamed, launching another swift strike at him. But Zeke effortlessly evaded it again, remarking that, just as he'd said, he could perceive and read her every single move. In the very next moment, he retaliated with a powerful strike of his own, sending Laika hurtling into the wall with tremendous force. The crowd cried out in shock, questioning if Laika had truly been bested. "Master Zeke, that was astounding. You've beaten Master Lee," Rangus exclaimed with delight. But Zeke calmly replied that it wasn't over yet, for their fight was not yet concluded. As the dust settled, Laika rose to her feet once more, battered but still defiant. Zeke took note that she had channeled her source power to her core, which allowed her to take the brunt of his attack without any critical damage. He offered a faint smile, admitting to himself that Laika was truly an exceptional girl. "That's enough, Master Leah," Rangus pleaded. But Zeke instructed him to stand back, warning that he could get swept up in their next exchange. It was then Zeke noticed an immense surge of aura beginning to emanate from Laika. He wondered if she had just achieved a breakthrough to the 2-star level. The crowd noticed it as well. It was unmistakable. The glowing insignia on her body was clear evidence that she had indeed ascended to a 2-star, now possessing a white aura. The 2-star rank was the stage where a warrior could channel source power into their martial arts, allowing them to manifest it outside their own body. Laika then offered her thanks to Zeke, stating that it was because of him that she had managed to reach the 2-star level ahead of schedule. But because of that, she declared, "You no longer have any chance of winning." With her aura blazing intensely, she charged at Zeke, her massive sword now cloaked in a brilliant power. Zeke merely laughed, a look of pure exhilaration on his face. "You've really improved," he said, his voice filled with excitement, as he dodged another one of her rapid strikes. "Your speed is incredible now," but in the next moment, his expression suddenly hardened. He felt a sudden sting on his cheek and realized he'd been grazed. "I'm sure I dodged that attack," Zeke thought to himself, like asking if he was finally beginning to understand the difference in their strength. "This is my true ability," she announced proudly. "Now that I've become a full-fledged 2-star and have gained my aura, I will demonstrate the true power of the truth under greatsword technique." "Oh, so I get to witness a martial art I've never seen before?" Zeke replied, a smile of pure excitement on his face. This was turning out to be the most thrilling and enjoyable part of their duel. Laika then suddenly unleashed the lightning greatsword technique, lightning flash, her sword erupting with blinding golden energy as she surged ahead. Zeke was immediately enveloped in a maelstrom of lightning, forcing him to stumble back a step as he yelled, "Hold on a second, what in the world was that technique? How can you command lightning with such finesse? Isn't this going too far for a simple sparring match?" A smirk played on Laika's lips as she plunged her sword into the earth, causing a brilliant golden light to erupt around her. "You look surprised," she commented with chilling composure as she prepared her next move. Lightning net. Arcs of electricity burst from the ground, weaving themselves into a crackling, luminous web that surged toward Zeke, but he evaded it by a hair's breadth. As he landed, he mused to himself, "Her power has skyrocketed. She's on a completely different level now. At this rate, this won't be an easy fight." The audience began to buzz with hushed murmurs, their astonishment impossible to conceal. Ever since Laika had ascended to the 2-star level, the tide of the battle had reversed completely. Rangus, who had been observing with a knot in his stomach, felt a growing sense of dread. Zeke, however, noticed that Laika's actual movements were deceptively simple, fundamentally unchanged from her 1-star self, but the force behind every single swing of her blade was now immensely greater. Her lightning greatsword style was brimming with raw energy, her very aura amplifying the potency of each strike. What truly caught Zeke off guard, however, was her speed. Laika moved with a swiftness he hadn't anticipated, and her lightning possessed a bizarre, almost enigmatic quality. Still, his confidence didn't waver. Even if she could shroud herself in thunder, he was certain he could find a way to overcome it. A deep curiosity gnawed at him. What was the true nature of this power? What kind of lightning did she truly command? As he deftly weaved through her relentless barrage of attacks, he meticulously studied her every motion, dissecting the rhythm of her aura. Laika's own smile tightened as she watched Zeke's unbothered expression while he practically danced away from her onslaught. "You seem far too composed for someone on the brink of defeat," she taunted. "Let's see how long that arrogance lasts." She then shot forward once, her blade igniting with a blinding light as she unleashed swift thunder, cloaking her entire body in golden lightning. But yet again, Zeke slipped away at the very last second. She truly moves like lightning itself, he thought. only for Leica to alter her attack mid-charge, swinging her sword. This time, the blow connected squarely, launching Zeke backward as a powerful shockwave erupted, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris across the arena. Rangus gasped and began to rush towards Zeke in a fit of panic, but another spectator grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. Meanwhile, Zeke pushed himself to his feet, his clothes singed but his will completely unshaken. Leica charged again, unleashing another blinding flash of lightning that struck him directly. And yet, after the light faded, Zeke remained standing. "How is—" Leica muttered, her brow knitting in disbelief. Rangus could bear it no longer and ran towards them, shouting, "Master Leica, stop. This is enough, we have all witnessed your strength." But Leica's reply was ice cold. "Are you a fool, Rangus? To stop a battle midway is the greatest insult to a warrior like Zeke." Desperate, Rangus shifted his plea, begging, "Please, Master, just surrender. This has gone on long enough." A cruel chuckle escaped Leica. "He has a point. Given your current state, surrender is the logical. If you kneel before me and swear your allegiance, I will end this." But Zeke's only response was a quiet, defiant smile. Leica's eyes hardened. "Even for an illegitimate child, you possess the stubborn pride of a true dragon," she spat, her voice laced with mockery as she raised her greatsword high into the air, her aura flaring to its peak. "If this is the end you desire, then I will grant it with my full power." A deafening roar of thunder echoed from the heavens as Leica invoked her first secret art, Heaven's Thunder. A colossal pillar of pure golden energy began to descend from the sky, instantly pulverizing the ground beneath Zeke's feet. The thunderbolt slammed into his body, enveloping him in a storm of divine fury as Rangus screamed his name, paralyzed with fear as he witnessed his friend's body being consumed by golden lightning, with smoke billowing from his scorched figure. Leica plunged her sword into the earth, letting out a heavy sigh as she whispered, "My apologies, Zeke, but this is where it concludes." But just then, a voice resonated through the electrically charged atmosphere, questioning, "Is that truly the case?" In a flash, a magnificent golden aura of lightning erupted towards them. Leica's eyes shot wide with disbelief as she spun around. "That's impossible. How could this be? Where did you get a light?" She stuttered in astonishment. Zeke stood there, a serene smile on his face as arcs of golden energy danced over his skin. "So, this is what you refer to as a lightning aura?" he asked nonchalantly. "If you're wondering how I acquired it, I genuinely have no idea." His tone was placid, yet his words sent a shockwave of confusion through the onlookers. "Impossible," Leica breathed, finding it hard to accept the sight on Zeke's lips. "The truth is, I allowed you to strike me intentionally. I wanted to observe your lightning, to understand its flow and behavior, and somehow, in the process, I learned to wield it myself." "That's preposterous," Leica fumed internally. Zeke reasoned to himself that he had intentionally weathered Leica's assaults because her lightning fascinated him. As he withstood her barrage, he was continuously employing his Dragon King's breath technique. A peculiar resonance formed between his breathing pattern and her electrical energy, causing golden energy to accumulate within his body. Before he even realized it, he had gained the ability to manipulate the lightning himself. "Maybe Leica possesses a unique constitution," he mused. "And considering her family's great swords, it's highly probable that their entire bloodline shares this affinity for lightning." With newfound confidence, Zeke strode toward her. "I never imagined that a lightning-type source power could be this astonishing. This duel has proven to be the ideal training session." A grin spread across his face as he added, "Thanks to you, Leah. I've managed to reach the 2-star level myself." Golden lightning crackled to life around him as he proclaimed, "Our fight is not over yet." Leica let out a furious roar and charged forward once more, her greatsword radiating with power as she unleashed another blindingly brilliant assault. Yet, Zeke dodged it with effortless grace and ready to counterattack. However, in the very act of moving, he abruptly vanished in a blur of motion, only to reappear at the far end of the arena. "What in the world just happened?" he muttered to himself. It then dawned on him, when a person acquires immense source power, it fortifies the body's muscles and nerves. This newfound lightning aura must have altered my physiology. I'm not yet able to fully command my own speed. Rangus was utterly dumbfounded. He could no longer track their movements. Both combatants were now just streaks of golden light and peals of thunder. "Is it just my imagination, or has Leah failed to land even a single blow recently?" he wondered. Overwhelmed with frustration, Leica screamed, "Are you making a fool of me, Zeke? Stop playing around." "I'm not," Zeke answered calmly. "But you are a genuine threat." He then shot forward, launching a powerful kick, which Leica managed to parry with her sword, the sheer impact sending her stumbling backward. Zeke straightened up, a smirk gracing his features. "I believe it's time we brought this to a close." "Brought this?" Leah echoed, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Precisely," Zeke confirmed. "I've been contemplating the creation of a new technique for some time now, and this seems to be the perfect opportunity." "Creating a new technique?" she repeated in utter disbelief. Zeke simply nodded. "That's right." He paused thoughtfully for a moment, then mused aloud, "Should I call it the first form, or perhaps a special form?" Leah blinked, thoroughly. Has he ever received any formal combat training? What family could have possibly taught him that, she wondered. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, but before she could even process it, Zeke materialized beside her in an instant, a torrent of lightning crackling in his palm. He roared the name of his technique, Dragon Destruction Combat Arts, Special Form, Lightning Peak. The devastating blow landed squarely, completely engulfing her in a ferocious maelstrom of golden thunder. Her entire frame convulsed violently as her sword clattered from her weakened grasp, sending her crumpling to her knees at his feet, arcs of electricity still dancing across her body. An absolute hush fell over the arena as Rangus and the onlookers stared on in utter disbelief. Against all odds, Zeke was the victor. Leah, sprawled on the ground, let out a shuddering breath. After a few tense moments, she painstakingly pushed herself into a sitting position, still trembling. I can't believe I was defeated, she thought. I was destined to be the next head of the family. I'm not supposed to lose to anyone. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. Just then, Zeke walked over and extended his hand toward her. You were incredible, Leah. Genuinely powerful, he said with complete sincerity. It's always a thrill to experience something new, and this battle was absolutely worth it. A warm smile spread across his face as he added, it would be a real shame if this was the very last time we ever crossed swords. We should definitely have another sparring session sometime. Leah went completely still, a deep blush creeping up her cheeks as she gazed at his offer. In spite of her crushing defeat, a faint hint of happiness graced her expression, a complex emotion born perhaps from pride, or maybe, just maybe, for the very first time in her life, it was a look of pure admiration.